Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third Claris Community Live. I'm Rosemary Teege, Community Engagement Manager at Claris, and I'm joined today by Wim DeCourt from Soliant Consulting and Doug Wallace from the Claris Product Management Team. And we're going to talk about security and what you need to know to be sure you have secure apps. So to get started, we've got a poll running, and if you don't see the poll, it's over in the sidebar on the right side of your screen. So please take a look at that and let us know if you're using external authentication and whether or not you have an SSL certificate installed on your server. So with that, Wim and Doug, why don't you introduce yourselves and then we'll get started.
Absolutely. My name is Wim DeCourt. I'm the director of the Claris practice at Soliant Consulting. I've been doing FileMaker for near on 30 years. And a lot of that time has been spent on server deployments and security. So it's a topic near and dear to my heart.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Doug Wallace. I'm a PM in the Claris product management team. I essentially work on Pro and bit of server, been at Claris for close to 10 years and been slaving away at FileMaker for vaguely 25 years as well. So it was nice to go from using it to actually now being able to actually fix the bugs that annoyed me before and get to work the way I wanted to work.
All right, so Wim, to get started, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of the landscape of security overall in technology, and then also, give us some ideas of why it's so important for us as FileMaker developers to be aware of security.
Yep, absolutely. So only a couple of slides that I want to show here just to visualize some of the concepts that we will be talking about. What's on screen there is exactly the reason why we want to take security seriously, right? Because these are the things that we want to protect. And of course, like most assets out there in the world these days, everything is under attack, right? So you have threats that are trying to figure out how to leverage any vulnerabilities that may be out there. If we don't pay sufficient attention to them actively and proactively, what we have on the right-hand side is going to happen, right? There's going to be a breach at some point. There's going to be an event that is going to end up costing you and your client money, and not just the outage of the system and data loss, anything that comes with that, but also almost more importantly, when it comes to the impact of that is a reputational impact, right? Some of these security events are big enough that they can drag a whole company down and under, meaning they can lead to the collapse of companies. And one of the common misconceptions in general, and what I'm showing on the screen here is the MITRE attack vector. We showed this a few times in different presentations. The main reason for wanting to show this is to show the complexity and the level of nuance that goes into these attacks, right? The attacks typically go from left to right on that scale there. And there's a lot of reconnaissance that comes into play, trying to figure out ways to get into your network. Once they're inside your network, how they can persist, how they can avoid detection, how they can move sideways. That's this lateral movement here into all of your assets. And these things will lay dormant for a long time until they can really understand how your data flows, where your backups are, where your files are, so that when they do trigger the attack, that they can take everything down at once, right? So one of the common misconceptions is, we build FileMaker solutions. What is the chance that somebody is going to target us, right? Because our client isn't that important. It's not like a big bank, although obviously we have clients that are in the realm where they have to think about these attacks that are targeted. But for the small to mid-sized businesses, it's an easy pitfall to think I am not going to be under attack. Nobody's interested in my stuff or want to steal my stuff. It's a misconception because that's not how these attacks work, right? You're not under attack because of who you are or what kind of data you are. You're simply under attack because you have an email address and you have a computer, right? These attacks are commoditized. They cast a wide net and they attack you simply because they can. so it's almost by accident, not so much by intention, that you will see these attacks come in and try to breach your defenses. So they will happen. That's really the message there. And the thing that we can do is we can make it harder. It's the analogy that I often use is like with burglar proofing your house. The intent is not to create a burglar proof house, because that would be wildly expensive. It's the same with all solutions. It's to make it hard enough that whoever the attacker is moves on, or the burglar tries for a couple of minutes and then moves on, right? It's the same side. It's the same level of approach that we want to do here.
Yeah,
so that's what we have.
Yeah, I just want to add, when I did several years, I did a security landscape presentation at DevCon. And I just remember in the research I did that, one reason small businesses were so highly attacked is because they have the weakest defenses. So I know my message at that time, very much like you're saying, Wim, was to help developers emphasize to their customers and their employers how important it is to just not be a available target. It's a defensive measure.
Absolutely. These slides actually come from my Engage presentation on security. So you can always go back and review that. This was one of the main points in the lead up to that, like, because there is a shift in where we have to focus those defenses that you talk about, Rosemary, right? We come from an age where we were thinking along the lines of, I have my castle with my moat, right? So the edge of my network is my moat. That's the thing that I'm protecting, the perimeter. These days, that doesn't apply anymore, right? Since COVID and even before, with remote workers, people are everywhere. They may be working on their own device, on their own network, connecting to your network. So that old school thinking of centralized defense doesn't apply anymore. It's one of the reasons that the identity, who you are, what you use to log in, the multiple factors, where you are, the geolocation, time of day, day of week, these kinds of things, that's really where a lot of the defenses are now focused, because that is your new parameter.
Yeah, I think just to bring up the poll results on external authentication or internal security, we had looks like about 75 people responded to that poll question, and 2/3 of them are using the internal FileMaker security and not external authentication. Do you want to talk a little about the importance and options for external authentication?
Absolutely. The external authentication has been a feature that has been available in the FileMaker platform, the Claris platform, for a long, long time, right? And it used to be these things that we have in the upper right corner, Active Directory, Open Directory, and internal local accounts on the FileMaker server machine, which was one of the often overlooked options. Since that time, the focus has been shifting to OAuth, OpenID Connect kind of connectivity or integration with identity providers. And to me, quite frankly, it makes no sense to create a FileMaker solution where the actual FileMaker file is an identity store, right? If I harp back to what I just said, the identity, the act of logging in is a primary point of trying to figure out, do I even allow this person in, right? So the management around the identity is crucial. And FileMaker, what I have on the screen there is not a definitive list of identity providers that you can use. These are just the ones that we have already used with clients. Because of the way that the Claris platform works, pretty much any modern identity provider is fair game. And you let those people worry about managing the accounts and the identity, because you will inherit so many features. From compliance reporting to multi-factor authentication. I mean, true multi-factor authentication, not the kind of stuff that people try to do themselves inside scripts, but actual multiple forms of authentication that are really sophisticated, right? So you basically, authentication is a solved problem, right? So delegate that to the people that spend lots of money in making it so and making it secure, so that when the user is brought to the doorstep of your FileMaker solution, you can be rest assured that they are who they say that they are, and let them into your solution.
Yeah, a question that just came in is, do any of these actions, or can any of those options, or which one of those options can use the common access cards that are used extensively with the US military and the US government? And I know I just can go back to my days as a systems engineer. I know integrating those was a big deal even 15 years ago. And I think, when I was actively working with the government, the CAC worked just straight up with Active Directory external authentication because that authentication system sat on top of Active Directory. So which of those models work now?
I would say pretty much all of these modern identity providers, the Oktas of the world, the Pings. We've used Ping exactly in that capacity with the Marine Corps, where they had to use their card. So it's really a question that you would have to bring to when you vet the identity providers. It's really that simple. You go and pick the identity provider that offers you that capability because they are the ones responsible for the authentication. It's a given that you'll be able to integrate those inside your FileMaker solution. As long as they support OAuth 2 or OIDC, which is a simplified form of OAuth 2, they're fair game. You can use them with your FileMaker solution. That goes too for passwordless. Like if you have a YubiKey or a similar hardware device, all these things work with FileMaker. We've Stephen Blackwell and I have done demonstrations on this. You can find the videos online. So entirely passwordless login into a FileMaker solution, it just works.
And especially, I mean, the work that we've been doing on the FileMaker server to make it really easy for people to actually use any provider. I mean, over the last couple of versions of FileMaker, we've made it really easy so that the information that we require is very limited, so that everything is handled by the provider of the security system, because we don't want to spend our time doing it. And so those companies, like we're saying, they're specialized in making sure that they can verify who's coming in. They have AI technologies in the background to verify whether they're getting attacks from multiple countries and stuff like that. So even though the internal system in FileMaker is good for basic usage, I would say as soon as you can move away from to external authentication, will just make your life a lot easier.
Yep, exactly. And to go back to the core concepts of this, there's two parts to that. There's the authentication part that is really all about verifying that the user is who the user is, so that you basically get a yay or nay on whether you should allow them into the FileMaker solution. Inside the FileMaker solution, what the user can do, that's the authorization, that's controlled by the privilege set. And the privilege set in FileMaker, and I made a point of that at the Engage presentation, it's actually pretty good. Like it's the way that all of the defaults are basically turned off. So as a developer, I have to explicitly grant privileges to the user as they on things that I want them to do or not to do inside the FileMaker solution. So want to make sure that we float those two concepts, authentication and authorization.
Yeah, going back to OAuth and authentication, Jack asked if there's, what are the roadmap ways to scale using groups with OAuth? I mean, he said, they're using OAuth against Google, but that's not scalable for hundreds of users because it doesn't support groups, whereas their Active Directory infrastructure does.
Yep.
So
it's a really good question to begin with, because when you set out to use external authentication, you absolutely want to use group-based authentication, right? So that inside your FileMaker solution, you simply do not have to create individual accounts for every user that will need access to your solution. So that the whole of the account management can be delegated to the identity provider. That is what you're shooting for. Now, some of the identity providers that we have on there, if I think, for instance, that sign in with Apple or Google on the left-hand side, Amazon, these by definition don't support groups. Like sign in with Apple doesn't support groups. It's not meant to be a group-based identity provider. Now, Google Workspace is kind of interesting because the default implementation that comes with your FileMaker server doesn't support groups, but you can actually to the point that Douglas was saying, inside FileMaker server, you can set up a custom identity provider, right? So you just provide the little pieces of information that you need. So Google Workspace can actually be done group-based authentication using that custom OAuth provider inside FileMaker server. So it just works, but that's what you're shooting for, group-based authentication.
And one more really good question on authentication, and then let's keep going. What's your recommendation for the full access developer account? Is that something authenticated through an identity provider, or should that continue to use internal FileMaker authentication?
Another really good question. There is no black or white answer to this. I'll talk through some of the things to consider. At the end of the day, it's a risk appetite kind of question, right? Like you have to weigh your deployments, the likelihood of any account to be breached. If you think back to, say, the Active Directory, right? An Active Directory is, there's such a thing as Active Directory spoofing. When you deploy an Active Directory integration with FileMaker server, there's no check there's no tie-in to, say, an Active Directory domain name or something like that, right? So if I can get hold of your files and you have a full access account that is authenticated through an Active Directory, and I can guess at the group name, then I can set up my own Active Directory to spoof yours and get access to your solution. Now, there's a lot of ifs and buts in there, right? I have to get access to your files to begin with. So you want to make sure that you secure your files and the backups to be able to do that. And I have to guess at the name of the group. So if you don't use evident names or easy to guess names, you're kind of safe. Now, some of the more modern authentication methods are really tied to the identity provider by application ID. So it's very, very specific. These are typically in the UUID fashion, so you can't really guess at them. So in that sense, they cannot be spoofed. So you have to weigh the risk of whether you want to have a full access group that belongs to the identity provider or whether you do that internally. They can both be secure. They can also both be insecure. It depends on how you implement it.
Actually, two more good authentication questions just came in. First, what do you recommend doing for scenarios when you're using a distributed solution with iPads that are used offline and then maybe syncing data when they are online? Is there any option besides using internal FileMaker accounts in that scenario?
You cannot use external authentication because that's driven by FileMaker server. So if you have a standalone file, then external authentication is not part of what you can do. So in that sense, you would have to use an internal FileMaker account to log in, so you make that secure. The data syncing, you would go to the data API or you put your own middleware to do that. The connection that you would use for the data API or the OData API can be secured with an externally authenticated account. So at least you can make that part really secure for data flows to and from your main solution or your hosted solution. But for the standalone disconnected file, you have to use internal accounts.
And last question is it possible to use external authentication on an air-broken network, meaning all your servers are on-prem with no internet access?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I have Keycloak here on the right-hand side. So most of these names that you have on the slide there are commercial online cloud providers, but they don't need to be, right? Keycloak by Red Hat. So this is not like a dinky toy kind of identity provider. It's industry grade identity provider, but you can install it on-prem, right? So you can set up your own identity provider, still do centralized management. Same with Active Directory, right? You can expose your Active Directory as ADFS, AD Federated Services, and integrate it with that through the same way. So there are quite a few on-prem options there for you.
Right. So now that we know kind of what to do, what are some recommendations, both Wim and Doug, for how do you get started if you don't know a lot about security in general, and then also more specifically, really robustly securing your FileMaker applications?
So I can quickly start on that one. So we've been writing and rewriting every year a security guide. I'll quickly share on the screen and Rosemary, you'll be able to actually share the link. So basically, is we've created this security guide long time ago. It's been reworked on in various sort of options. If you've basically been using FileMaker and you've essentially been using just internal sort of user account and you're kind of scared of the fact that how it actually works around it, we've actually tried to make it kind of nice and easy to actually sort of go along. Those type of guide we actually don't, it's just not Claris just doing on its own. We've been working with Wim and people that are basically very famous on the security side inside the community to actually sort of make sure that people kind of understand it. But the principle behind it is when you're going to actually set up your system, you need to actually sort of decide, first of all, in type of software, the software that we use, whether it's going to use FileMaker Cloud or FileMaker Server. FileMaker Cloud has its own IDP that we use called Claris ID. We manage everything for you. The backend behind it is a system called AWS Cognito from Amazon. It's brilliant because it does all the work for us. It's very secure. It has AI to learn whether people are trying to actually do spoof attacks or whatever type of attacks. And so you can actually rely on that. Otherwise, you could use basically FileMaker Server and through the admin console, easily set up access to a 90 directory or any type of OAuth providers out there. Once you've decided which way you want to go, the security basically is going to tell you information around how to actually make sure people authenticate to your system. So you're going to have different type of privileges, different type of actually how people actually log in. The information is all there. Just go through this simple sort of stuff. It tells you, in some cases, stuff that you shouldn't do, like basically the guest account. As soon as you're putting a file on a server, the best way is to actually sort of remove that. So that it's going to be harder for people to actually sort of break into your system. An importance as well on every system, and it's not just for FileMaker, is when you're creating user account, make sure basically the user controls the password that is actually assigned to them. We've seen way too many times where people share accounts, and it's even easier that way for people to be able to actually lose their password or by error sort of give it to someone else who's not really sort of shouldn't actually be getting access to the system. So it's really about the idea of a group-based system where every user has their own password, and that way they can actually control how they can actually use the system on top of that. So I invite everyone to actually sort of go through that if they want more information. We've also published what we call the IT Pro page on our website. This is more for conversation with IT management in your organization or for your customers. But it's a nice way to go through like some of the basic of what you should be looking at when you're starting to actually sort of do the system. The four main aspect of it is kind of straightforward, is around security, integration, administration, and deployment. If you apply a good vision in terms of security, like a user-based systems managed by groups, where there's one centralized area where you're going to manage where the logging is being done and whatever. If you put that from the beginning to your system, it's going to be a lot easier to explain to people internally how it works. And it's going to basically give you the confidence that you know that you have a secure, safe environment. And like what I'm saying is, if you're basically creating this gate in front of your system that is going to basically make it harder for a hacker or whoever wants to come in, and the amount of work that they have to do is going to be too much for the benefit they're going to get out of it, then it is basically going to go better. If you listen to some of the story that happened a couple of weeks ago about large companies that weren't really doing it properly, it made it easy for hackers to get inside it. There was a benefit for them to be able to actually hack the systems and get a huge amount of data because the gate was partly open because of doing the work too quickly and not going through all the various steps. They were basically creating that issue. So as soon as you basically put that into your system, you've got your mind's going to be basically in a nice environment. You're going to be able to actually have a safe environment, and everything's going to go through. So again, go through that. If like a lot of people, basically, you don't actually have to actually worry about managing your external authentication systems and not having to actually worry about anything, you can actually leverage either FileMaker Cloud, where we have our Claris ID, or go directly to a partner They have some great hosting solutions where they'll do all the work for you in the background, and you won't actually have to worry about anything. We have this document on our website again around the Claris Cloud Services Security. So it's based on the Claris ID system that we use for FileMaker Cloud and Connect and Claris Studio. It's all managed by the AWS accounts that we have through Apple. It is very secure. It works really nicely, and you can do a lot of things with it. Again, you can go through it. It will explain to you some of the certification that we have around FileMaker Cloud and Connect in terms of security. By the way, that basically is we manage your safeguard information in our systems. There's like ISO certification. So all information that you need around how we do security on FileMaker Cloud and Claris Connect is in that document. And hopefully it will give you a better sort of sense of what we've been doing and how you can actually leverage that in your organization.
Yeah, so just while you were sharing, Doug, a couple questions came in. So, someone who's saying the biggest roadblock they are experiencing is that IT says Claris is not approved. It's not secure. And he's looking for either someone from Claris to help facilitate that conversation. So do we have a process for that to help internal developers or partners make the case to enterprise IT?
So for the enterprise IT, like we have the IT Pro page that has basically a list of everything that we've worked. It explains basically the security protocols that we use inside the FileMaker, how the TLS works inside the FileMaker, how the encryption at rest actually works inside the FileMaker. The way we kind of go into conversation normally when we basically Claris actually talk to this type of customers is going on the fact that why do you have this vision of actually of a FileMaker or Claris being sort of unsecure? And it's kind of the way that sometimes it's been used for a long times and the entry-level security was not really put in place. And so when we normally go back, it says, well, all you have to do to make it secure is, and if your company is using already external authentication, just link your FileMaker server to the environment, and then you've got security. Exactly the same way you have it when you're using Excel, Dropbox, Microsoft Office, whatever other system that they have inside it, you're basically going to be leveraging the same security. Then you're creating your groups inside the FileMaker, and then you're creating basically your secured system. So it's really relating to the other software they have in the company to make sure that they understand that we're not any different from the rest out there. We use the same technology in the market to make sure security is actually implemented.
Yeah, so a follow-on question for that. If they've adopted, if the customer is using FileMaker Cloud rather than an on-premise server, can FileMaker Cloud connect to all of those OAuth enterprise security providers as well, or is Cloud's limited to just Claris ID?
So we can link Claris ID. So when you create an account to Microsoft Azure and Okta, those are the two we've been able to actually sort of get the work done. We are working as well with customers and partners that have requests to actually have other systems. So we're going to basically try to actually increase the amount of providers that we can actually have running with Claris ID. Because essentially is once you actually have set up a system, you don't actually have to create other places. You want to use that main system and actually use that across the board. So in versions coming of FileMaker Cloud, we'll try to increase the amount of IDP that we can actually provide for people.
Yep. And to emphasize some of the things that Doug was saying, we feel that exact question all the time, right? Where we are summoned to the IT department meeting to explain the Claris platform and to basically debunk the notion that it's not secure. The authentication part is probably the single most important factor there. Right? As soon as you say we can just leverage whatever identity provider you have, pretty much that ends the battle right there. There's other aspects like change management and other things that they would want to know. But the bulk of that is exactly in the authentication part, right? Where they where the ID department has the reassurance that the identities are managed in a central place and that they have the benefits of all the things that come from the identity provider.
Wim, I know this is a hot topic frequently that comes up in the community, is developers like to build their own security systems. Can you just talk a little bit about the risks of doing that? And I think this also goes to one of the questions we've got, that someone's looking to automate some of the account management within external authentication for FileMaker security.
Sure. I'll tackle the last question first because that's the easiest, right? Because the analogy that people are looking for there is or the similarity is the same as the scripted account management that you have for internal FileMaker accounts. Most identity providers have APIs, right? So if you want to automate the account creation or the resetting passwords, all of these things, that's just an API integration. And most FileMaker developers are already actively doing API integrations or on the cusp of doing them. So that's just par for the course these days, right? To just leverage the APIs that are available to you. So that's kind of easy on that side. And if for people who haven't done API integrations, it's really like once you've done your first one, you'll look back and go like, well, that was a whole lot easier than I thought it was. Let's do more of that, right? So, and the community will help, right? Like ask questions on the community will get you there. Now, onto the hot topic of ersatz security systems. We always have so much fun with these in a kind of sad way, right? Because people think that they're secure, and then for the people that want to be tested, they put them out on the community, and typically it takes no more than a couple of minutes to get inside those solutions because there's always something that gets overlooked. At the core of this is all of these systems work on the notion that they will let everybody in, right? They use some sort of auto login mechanism into FileMaker so that their scripts and their layouts can take over the work of trying to authenticate. But it's a fallacy because the user is already authenticated. They are already in your solution. And that this is typically where it goes wrong, if you give me access to your solution without being challenged, I can find ways to poke around, right? That's like leaving your car door open and hoping that nobody can figure out how to turn on the ignition. It's the exact same analogy. The key factor here is that once you authenticate using the FileMaker security scheme, once you get past that gateway, FileMaker is going to try and do everything in its power to give stuff to you, right? Whereas just before, it's going to do, at the authentication part, is going to try to do its best to keep you out. And you have to prove that you're allowed to go in. But once you're authenticated, you're fighting FileMaker's mechanisms that are built towards sharing data, right? And then you have to hope that you're more clever than what that is when it's going to try and share data. So keeping accounts in as FileMaker data in tables, using scripts. If you watch the Claris Engage security session at the beginning, the first couple of minutes, I put a lot of screenshots out there and I challenged the audience. Like, given this privilege set, can the user do this or that? To a fault, pretty much everybody in the audience had it wrong, and I think that's not a knock on. It's most of my questions were like geared towards misleading people, but it proves the point that if you're trying to roll your own security, you're going to make mistakes, right? Because you're not using the security schema that Claris gives you. So don't do it.
It's not made for that. Tables are not made to actually store that type of data anyway.
Correct.
So this question, I think for Doug, is if guest access in FileMaker is not secure to have turned on, why have it in the product for so long? Are there use cases where it makes sense to allow guest access?
See, originally we had it in the trial experience for new users to actually start playing around with FileMaker. So everyone started one day, they basically got landed a copy of FileMaker Pro, start playing with it. And then in some cases, you want to share it with your iPhone and iPad. So you're creating an app, you just want to share it sort of locally quickly. You can leverage basically the guest access, so you don't actually have to create another account. One of the reasons as well, we actually sort of kept it basically in the system and have it available, is if you do require to actually set up a form using FileMaker Web Direct, where you just want to basically people to actually go to a page, fill in information, do a submit, the best way will be to actually have a guest access. You won't actually do that on a main production environment. You could set up a FileMaker server and just have it running. So we still basically have this option of both on the Pro and the server to actually enable guest access, because they always mean by case internally where someone, for some testing purposes or very specific use case, needs to have it. But what we tell people in most cases is if you know that you want to make sure that you know who's going to basically have access to your data, just turning off completely and just use proper external accounts. That'll be safer for you.
Yeah. Couple more questions, I think, just to re-emphasize external authentication. The first is, Wim, I guess, can you just kind of explain the process of using multi-factor authentication with a third-party authenticator integrated into FileMaker? Does that work out of the box natively, or would it only work with a custom script and API integration?
It works out of the box because the process of external authentication is typically on either the Web Direct or the FileMaker Pro login dialog. The user clicks a button. That button actually takes them to the identity provider. So the user is not in FileMaker at that point. The authentication happens outside of FileMaker. That's the core concept of it. So typically, this is browser-based. So the user is actually taken to the browser, is now at the identity provider, and will use all of the identity provider's functionality to provide whatever forms of authentication that are required. So if you set up your identity provider to use multi-factor authentication, either be an authenticator app, a YubiKey, things like a passkey, all of the things that are possible right now, all of that functionality is at the identity provider. So they are in control of the functionality. When the user is done authenticating, the only thing that flows back to FileMaker is a yay or a nay, right? And if it's a yay, it contains some information about who that user is, email, groups they belong to, that kind of thing, right? So in essence, none of this happens inside FileMaker. It's all functionality that is baked into the identity provider.
Just like checking questions again. This is a good one from Vince. Do you have guidance on what you might do differently for security configuration on a development server or a staging or a production server, including a staging server if that is in use?
It's a good question, and it's I typically wouldn't make my staging, development, testing server different than my production server, for the simple reason that, especially for testing, you'd want that to be an almost exact replica of the actual production environment, because otherwise you're not really testing the right things. Now, granted, with external authentication, because none of that functionality is inside FileMaker, it's really the same thing. Because the user is taken to the identity provider. So it's not uncommon to use a different identity provider for development and testing than it is for production. A FileMaker server can be configured to talk to multiple external identity providers. So you're not limited to one. So you can have one for dev, you can have one for prod, you can even have one for different identity pools. Maybe you have internal users and external users. They can both use a different identity provider. But to Vince's question, I would keep my development and testing server as close, equal to my production server.
And here's a very tactical question from Tim. how do you handle WebDirect login and reset password requests? Is there a way to change the default login page?
Absolutely. Let me see if I can bring it up real quick. It's actually functionality that Claris provides us. There we go. And let me share my screen. It's a feature that is not very well known, unfortunately. But let's stay. I'll basically scroll before I share my screen so that you can actually see what's happening. Oh, there we go. Right. So this is a blog post, and we'll include it in the session notes. So Claris provides us with a JavaScript utility that you can install. It kind of depends on your deployment, but the end result is a flow that goes exactly like that, right? So the user in the top left corner is on your own website, WordPress site, whatever your main website is, and you provide a login button that's there. That one takes the user to your identity provider of choice. When they pass, they go straight into your WebDirect solution. They do not pass through the WebDirect landing page or the default WebDirect files login page. When they log out, you use the home URL feature of WebDirect to take them straight back into your main website. So, so the blog post talks about seamless authentication of WebDirect. So it's already possible as part of the platform.
Wow, I think I didn't even realize that was possible. Thanks.
Yep. And the blog post has a fully detailed walkthrough of all the pieces that you need to deploy to make that happen.
So another external authentication question, how do user permission groups work in FileMaker if you're authenticating against a variety of external authentication providers?
The main challenge.
Go ahead, Doug. Go ahead.
No, the main challenge is your group names. They shouldn't conflict, right? The inside FileMaker Pro, you have the section where you pick your external identity provider when you go to set up the group names. So you basically set the group names in their right section, if you will. And the only thing that can create a conflict is if you have the same exact group name in two different identity providers. Because FileMaker Pro will only let you use this. The name has to be unique on the FileMaker Pro side. That's really the only thing, unless I missed something, Doug.
No, that's correct. Yeah. So as long as your groups basically names are different between all the IDP they use, you'll be fine. If you use the same one, it will just use the first one that actually comes up on the list, and might not work the way you want it to work.
All right, I'm going to go take us back to the poll now, which the other question we asked at the beginning of the session is, do you have an SSL certificate installed on your FileMaker server? And the good news is that 65 of the 76 people who responded to the poll said yes. So I guess Wim and Doug both, do you want to talk about the importance of SSL certificates? And then Doug, if you want to foreshadow a little bit about what we're going to talk about in 2 weeks with some of the new SSL features in FileMaker server.
Yep, I can take that and hand it off to Doug then to make that transition. SSL certificates are, well, they're mandatory, right, on a production FileMaker server. The help says so, and for good reason. They're, as you know, I am on the community a lot, and the question does come up. People seem to struggle with either the notion of why you should have an SSL certificate, and then secondly, with the mechanics of obtaining one, installing one, all of that. What we have on the screen there is a recent blog post I did to basically walk through everything about that, from the reasons why to those mechanics. Basically, it's a synthesis of a lot of the questions I've seen over the years and trying to come up with answers on that. So I think it's a great resource to for anybody who's struggling with the concept of SSL certificates. SSL certificates do two things, right? They obviously encrypt the data that flows between the client and the server and the client. So encryption in transit is what it provides, and that's really the meat of why you would want to have it, right? So that if anybody snoops on your traffic, it's encrypted. There's nothing that they can do with that. Remember when I showed this this attack vector here, right? So there's a lot of persistence, initial access, discovery that happens during these attacks. So so you may think I don't have external access to my FileMaker server or external users. I don't need an SSL certificate. That's not true. That's one of those myths, right? Because these attacks will burrow into your network and then sit there trying to learn everything that they can about it, including snooping on traffic. So having an SSL certificate and having that encryption at rest for traffic that never leaves your network is just as crucial as having it for the outside. The other part is name validation, right? If I connect to a server by name, I want to make certain, or I want to be certain that I am actually connecting to that server. That's what the certificate also validates, that you are connecting to the right server. Those are the two benefits, and they are a must in the modern landscape of security. IT departments will mandate them. Like even if you don't care, you will be made to care. Also browsers, if you use an IP address to connect to either WebDirect or the admin console or use the data API, most of it these days will fail if you don't have an SSL certificate on the other side. Like the browsers these days will not let you proceed anymore. Like progressively, they'll make it harder to establish those kinds of insecure connections. And one of the main features of FileMaker 2024, FileMaker Server 2024, is the ability to get a free Let's Encrypt certificate. So even though commercial certificates are dirt cheap, we're talking about maybe anywhere between $5 and $15 per year. If you really want to have a free certificate, Let's Encrypt will do that, and that's now possible in an automated fashion.
Yeah, the work we've done, so FileMaker Server 2024, and we'll have a session in about 2 weeks' time where we'll probably go a bit more into details. And there's going to be a lot of people talking about it. So we are supporting inside FileMaker Server the Let's Encrypt SSL certificate. What I'm saying is it's great because it's free of charge. The best aspect I think behind it is basically the organization behind it. So the foundation behind it is really about the fact that it's not whether you should actually have an SSL certificate, is you should have one. And they are going with the fact that it should not be a commodity that basically company make money out of it. There's no excuse not to actually have one. On top of it, they've actually created these great systems whereby they want to make sure people will actually update the certificate on their machine on a regular basis. And so what we actually created within FileMaker is a system script that you can run through schedule, where every 3 months, automatically, your certificate is going to be renewed with Let's Encrypt, and then you don't actually have to worry about going back to the environment, creating new cert and stuff like that. It's pretty much an automation process. More and more in the future, I think a lot of companies, even though they are going saying is you could actually have your certificate for 1 year, more as long as we have a lot of hackers out there trying to actually get into the system, we want to make sure that SSL certificate that get updated regularly. So you'll see maybe sometimes companies going, well, actually, instead of actually having a yearly certificate, you'll have a 6 months one or 90 days, and then you can actually renew that. But it is vital to actually sort of kind of have one because it secures everything, your data, people from the outside coming in, and you're just making sure that everything works properly. I was seeing some of the questions is when you actually connect internally and you using the IP address, the icon to actually tell you whether you have a SSL certificate is always on orange, not the green. It's because you're not going to the third-party provider to actually validate that your certificate is the right value. So it's not saying that it's unsecure. It's just saying that it's basically not validating the connection to that certificate authority. So it not ideal, but basically that's the kind of how the system kind of actually works. And you'll get the same stuff if you do self-signed certificate internally. You'll just get the orange lock icon telling you that it's kind of safe, but not 100% safe. So not ideal solution, but in some cases we understand why it actually works like this.
All right.
to piggyback on that concept there real quick, I think it's one of the most important concepts in with SSL certificates. It's that chain of trust, right? Because if somebody gives you a certificate, they're basically saying, trust us. You can trust Wim because we gave him a certificate. So, and then basically the question is, do I trust whoever issued me my certificate? And then the question becomes, do I trust the issuer of that certificate, right? So it's an unsolvable problem unless you decide to trust somebody. And that's the whole chain of trust. So if you do something like SSL Labs and you ask for an SSL reports, you can sort of see that, right? So the certification path goes from your server through that set of intermediate providers until you get to a root certificate authority that everybody trusts. Like every device, every operating system has a set of root certificate authority certificates that everybody trusts because they chose to. So basically, the chain of trust establishes the trust between your certificate as issued to you and that kind of root certificate authority.
I think I have a couple last questions. So this one is about specifically the web viewer. Is the web viewer more severely impacted by cross-site scripting? So since the web viewer can access a JavaScript library to call scripts in FileMaker, can a malicious user get unsanitized HTML into the DOM, and then would they be able to run scripts which could potentially make changes to the data on the server?
That is a long-winded question.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think through the mechanics of how you would have to put that together. I'm not going to rule anything out, so I'm not going to say give it an absolute no, but it would be incredibly hard to do because it would have to depend on so many things. First of all, the injection of malicious code, right? I'm hard pressed to see how that would be done automatically. Could be done, right? Because if you load an external library, you have to trust, right? There's that word again. You have to trust that that library doesn't do anything that it's not supposed to do, which really shifts the problem to either host your own libraries so that you don't have to go to the outside, or only link to trusted sources. There have been a lot of dependency attacks in the news in the last couple of years, right? So this would fall into that category where you think you're linking to a library, a JavaScript library that is trusted, and it really isn't because it got compromised. So it could be done. I don't think it's probably less susceptible than anything that you would do in a browser hosted on a web server, but probably not impossible to leverage as a vulnerability.
All right, I think we've got about 5 minutes left. So I see Angie is dropping all the references we've already shared into the chat. Do you have any other things you want to share before we end today?
Yeah, I saw there was a couple of questions around like the IT management and having issues getting the message across and see whether Claris can help. We are there for that. So just basically go for your sales rep. We have a team called the App Success Team that can actually help you on those cases. And then we can set up meetings with your IT management if you have issue trying to get them to understand why is FileMaker secure and why it's not that much of a danger for them to actually use it in their organization.
Last thought for me would be on the question about how do you get going with security? What if it's intimidating? It's like the not seeing the forest through the trees, that kind of thing. Doug mentioned the help, right? It's a great resource. So is the support knowledge base, right? support.claris.com. Just look for the articles that talk about it. The community is a great resource, right? Just ask the question. We have a very friendly community, very helpful. So people will help you on your way. I'm on there all the time. So any security related questions, I'm happy to jump on those. Partners like ourselves, we write a lot of blog content that talk about security. So there's a lot of stuff that you can discover that way. And if you don't seem to be finding the answers to the questions, just jump on the community and ask.
Yes, the community is of course my favorite resource as community lead. And just finally, we are offering right now a security checkup to customers. I'm dropping the page in the chat, and let me share that page right now. Make sure it's up before I start to share. But here it is. And with this page, you can sign up for a security checkup. And that is, again, going through the app success team that Doug mentioned. And this is just, again, kind of a wrap up of the security landscape and the work that Claris has been doing to improve the power and security of all of our most recent releases. And if you want to learn more about FileMaker 2024, please join us in 2 weeks for our next live stream, specifically about what you can do with the FileMaker 2024 release. My guest for that will be Doug and also Rick Coleman, both from the product management team, to share everything that's new. And I see just a couple last questions. Sales rep, how do I find a sales rep? Best way to do that is just call the 800 number in your region. And even if you don't know specifically who your rep is, you can leave a message or talk to whoever answers the phone, and they'll make sure to connect you with the right contact. And you can also, oh, great, Grego just dropped the link into the chat. So I think that is all we have today. Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Wim, for sharing your knowledge, and thank you, Doug, for being the voice of FileMaker. And I look forward to seeing everyone in a couple of weeks. And yes, there will be a recording, and we will share it out both in Claris community, on Claris YouTube, in Claris Academy, and I think in a follow-up email, we'll also send everyone the link. And I think, Wim, also you're going to post a wrap-up in community, and I will link the recording there once it's available.
Absolutely.
So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.